The ships came on a Tuesday morning. They appeared in the sky without warning, without sound, without any of the signs that humanity's scientists had always said would come before first contact. One moment the sky was blue and clear. The next moment it was filled with darkness. Jake was drinking his third cup of coffee when the alarm started screaming inside NORAD. He dropped the cup and ran to the main control room, where dozens of screens showed the same impossible image. Massive vessels, each one larger than any aircraft carrier ever built, hung over every major city on Earth. New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow. They blocked out the sun and cast shadows that stretched for miles. "What the hell are those things?" Jake asked, but nobody could answer him. Nobody had answers for anything that day. The aliens did not try to talk. They did not send messages or make demands. They simply waited for 6 hours while humanity scrambled to respond. World leaders held emergency meetings. Military forces went to high alert. Television stations broadcast the same footage over and over again. People filled the streets, looking up at the sky with fear in their eyes. Then the burning began. The first plasma beam hit Washington, D.C. at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. Jake watched on his screens as the entire city disappeared in a flash of white light. The camera feeds went dead. The communication lines went silent. Where millions of people had lived and worked just seconds before, there was now only fire and melted stone. The attacks came everywhere at once. The alien ships released their weapons on every continent, every country, every population center they could find. Cities burned. Towns vanished. The death toll climbed into the hundreds of millions within the first hour alone. Humanity tried to fight back. Jake coordinated with what remained of the military command structure. They launched missiles at the alien vessels. Fighter jets rose to meet the enemy. Warships fired everything they had at the shadows in the sky. Nothing worked. The missiles exploded harmlessly against invisible shields. The jets were swatted down like insects. The warships were vaporized before they could even get close. It was not a war. It was an extermination. Jake stayed at his post for 3 days without sleep. He watched as the screens went dark one by one. Satellite feeds disappeared. Radio channels fell silent. The world was dying around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. On the 4th day, a young officer named Pete handed him a folder. "Sir, you need to see this. It came from one of the deep monitoring stations in Colorado. A Dr. Kate sent it before her facility lost power." Jake opened the folder and looked at the data inside. It showed seismic readings from deep beneath the earth. Strange patterns, rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat. "She thinks something is down there," Pete explained. "Something that started moving right after the attacks began. She thinks it might be responding to what's happening on the surface." Jake shook his head. "It's probably just equipment malfunction. The whole planet is shaking apart. Of course the readings are strange." He put the folder aside and went back to watching his screens die. There were more important things to worry about than strange vibrations underground. But Kate was not so easy to dismiss. She was a geologist who had spent 20 years studying the deep structures of the Earth. She knew what normal seismic activity looked like. And she knew that what her instruments were detecting was not normal at all. Kate worked in a small facility built into the side of a mountain. It was designed to monitor earthquakes and volcanic activity. It was not designed to survive an alien invasion, but its remote location and underground construction had kept it hidden from the enemy so far. She sat alone in her lab, surrounded by printouts and computer screens. Her colleagues had fled or died. The power was running on backup generators, but she could not leave, not when her instruments were showing her something impossible. The pulses came from deep below, much deeper than any natural earthquake. They came from the boundary between the crust and the mantle, from places where nothing should be moving at all, and they were getting stronger. "What are you?" Kate whispered to herself as she studied the data. What's down there? Outside her facility, the world continued to burn. The aliens moved across the planet with mechanical precision. They did not occupy territory or take prisoners. They simply destroyed. Their ships floated above the ruins like metal gods, watching their work with what seemed like cold satisfaction. Some humans tried to hide. They fled into forests and deserts. They crawled into caves and basements. They went anywhere they could think of to escape the fire from the sky. Jake eventually led a small group of survivors out of NORAD. The facility had been detected. Enemy forces were coming. They had to move or they would die. They traveled at night, avoiding the alien patrols that swept across the land. They found other survivors along the way. Soldiers, civilians, children who had lost their parents, old people who had lost everything. They all moved together, a ragged line of humanity creeping through the shadows of their broken world. "Where are we going?" a woman asked Jake one night as they rested in an abandoned mine. "Underground," Jake replied. "As deep as we can go. They're focusing on the surface. Maybe if we go deep enough they won't find us." It was not much of a plan, but it was all they had. By the end of the first month, the surface of the earth was silent. The cities were gone. The armies were gone. The governments were gone. 90% of humanity had been killed. The survivors huddled in tunnels and bunkers, wondering if they were the last people left alive. The aliens did not seem to care about them. They had won. The planet belonged to them now. They began building structures on the surface, strange towers and machines whose purpose no one understood. They drilled into the earth, extracting metals and minerals. They treated the planet like a resource to be harvested. But deep underground in her mountain facility, Kate was still watching her instruments. The pulses were stronger than ever now. Something was definitely down there, something old, something big. And it was waking up. 3 months passed in the darkness below the earth. The survivors learned to live like moles, moving through tunnels and abandoned mines, eating whatever they could find, sleeping in shifts so someone was always watching for danger. Ben had been an army sergeant before the invasion. Now he was the leader of a small resistance cell hiding in the deep coal mines of the Appalachian Mountains. His group had grown to almost 200 people. They were miners, soldiers, teachers, doctors, children, and old folks. They were all that remained of the towns that had once dotted these hills. Ben kept them alive through careful planning and strict discipline. They moved often, never staying in one place long enough to be found. They posted guards at every entrance. They rationed their food and water. They survived. But survival was not enough. Ben knew that hiding in holes while aliens harvested their planet was no way to live. He wanted to fight back. He just did not know how. One day, a scouting party came back with strange news. They had found a tunnel that was not on any of their maps. It was old, very old. The walls were smooth, carved from solid rock with a precision that no human tool could match. And there were symbols on the walls. Strange marks that looked like writing but in no language anyone could read. Ben went to see it himself. He walked through the narrow passage with a flashlight in one hand and a rifle in the other. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. The air was warm and dry. The walls seemed to glow with a faint inner light. The symbols grew more complex, covering every surface in patterns that made his eyes hurt if he looked at them too long. "What is this place?" asked one of his scouts, a young woman named Lisa Park. "I don't know," Ben admitted, "but someone built it a long time ago." They followed the tunnel for miles. It went deeper than any mine Ben had ever seen. The pressure should have been crushing at this depth, but the air remained breathable. The temperature stayed comfortable. Whoever had built this place had known things that modern humans did not. Word of the discovery spread through the underground network of survivors. Eventually, it reached Kate, who was still monitoring her seismic instruments in her mountain facility. When she heard the description of the tunnel, her heart began to race. She had to see it for herself. The journey took her 2 weeks. She traveled through a network of caves and abandoned mines, guided by resistance fighters who knew the underground paths. When she finally reached Ben's camp, she was exhausted but excited. "The pulses I've been detecting," she told Ben. "They're coming from somewhere near here. Whatever is making them, it's connected to these tunnels somehow." Ben was suspicious at first. He had learned not to trust outsiders. But Kate showed him her data, explained her theories, and eventually convinced him to let her study the ancient tunnel. She spent days examining the walls, taking samples, running tests. What she found made no scientific sense. The rock had been carved at least 60,000 years ago. That was long before any known human civilization, long before humans were supposed to be capable of building anything at all. Yet the symbols on the walls were clearly meant for human eyes. They were designed to be read by minds that thought like human minds. Kate became certain that whoever had built this place was connected to humanity in some way. Perhaps they were ancestors. Perhaps they were something else entirely. Meanwhile, on the surface, the aliens continued their work. They called themselves though no human had ever spoken to them directly. They communicated among themselves through radio signals that human equipment could intercept. The survivors listened to these signals, trying to learn about their enemy. What they learned was not encouraging. They had conquered thousands of worlds. They traveled from planet to planet, stripping each one of its resources before moving on. They had no interest in communication or cooperation. To them, other species were nothing more than obstacles to be removed. They spoke of Earth with contempt. The dominant species had been pathetically weak, they said. Their weapons had been primitive. Their resistance had been meaningless. This world would be drained of its metals and minerals within a decade, and then they would move on to their next target. The survivors who listened to these transmissions felt a cold anger building in their hearts. They were not obstacles. They were not weak. They would find a way to make the pay for what they had done. Deep in the ancient tunnel, Kate finally found what she was looking for. The passage opened into a massive chamber, so large that her flashlight could not reach the far walls, but she did not need light to see what was inside. They stood in rows, dozens of them, towering figures made of metal and crystal. Each one was at least 30 meters tall. Their bodies were shaped like humans, but their skin was made of something that looked like living silver. Their eyes were dark crystals that reflected no light. Kate approached the nearest figure with trembling legs. She reached out and touched its foot. The metal was warm, almost alive. She could feel a faint vibration running through it, like a heartbeat waiting to start. "My God," she whispered. "They're guardians, they're here to protect us." She found an inscription on the pedestal beneath the figure. Her translation software worked on it for hours, but eventually produced a result. The words were simple, but they made Kate cry when she read them. "When the sky burns and the children cry out, we shall answer." Kate ran back to Ben's camp as fast as she could. She gathered everyone together and told them what she had found. The Guardians had been built by an ancient civilization, she explained. They were designed to sleep until humanity faced a threat too great to survive alone. Then they would wake up and defend their creator's children. "We have to wake them up," Kate said. "They're our only hope." Ben looked at her for a long moment. He had seen too much death. He had lost too many friends. He was afraid to hope. But he was also tired of hiding in the dark. "Tell me how," he said. Kate spent weeks studying the Guardians. She examined their bodies, analyzed their construction, and tried to understand how they worked. The technology was far beyond anything she had ever seen. It made modern human science look like cave paintings compared to a computer. But she was not alone in her work. Danny Vance was a young engineer who had survived the invasion by hiding in a server room in Virginia. He had made his way underground and eventually joined Ben's group. When he heard about the Guardians, he volunteered to help Kate figure them out. Danny was good with machines. He could look at a device and understand how its parts fit together. The Guardians were unlike anything he had worked with before, but he refused to give up. He spent long hours in the chamber, climbing over the massive figures, taking measurements, running tests. One night he came to Kate with excitement in his eyes. "I think I found something," he said. "Look at this." He showed her a series of readings he had taken from the Guardians' heads. There was a pattern in the data, a frequency that repeated over and over again. It matched the seismic pulses that Kate had been detecting for months. "They're waiting for a signal," Danny explained. "Something to tell them it's time to wake up, and I think I know what that signal is." He pulled up another set of data. This one showed the electromagnetic patterns produced by human brains. When many people were gathered together, thinking and feeling similar things, their brains created a combined signal. It was faint, but it was real. "The frequency matches," Danny said. "The Guardians are designed to respond to human thought, to human emotion. They need us to call them." Kate understood immediately. That's why the inscription says the children must cry out. It's not just a figure of speech. The Guardians literally need humans to call for help. But there was a problem. The signal from a few hundred people was not strong enough. The Guardians needed thousands of humans gathered in one place, all focused on the same thought. Only then would the signal be powerful enough to trigger the awakening. Ben listened to their explanation with a frown on his face. "You're asking me to gather thousands of people in one spot," he said. "That's exactly what they are looking for. If they find us, they'll kill everyone." "I know it's dangerous," Kate admitted. "But what choice do we have? We can hide down here until we die of old age, or we can take a chance and wake up the only things that might be able to save us." Ben thought about it for a long time. He thought about all the people he had lost, his wife, his daughter, his entire unit. He thought about the world he had known, now burned to ashes on the surface above. He thought about the sitting in their ships, treating Earth like a piece of meat to be carved up. "All right," he said finally. "We'll do it, but we need to be smart about this. We need to bring people in slowly in small groups so we don't attract attention." They spread the word through the underground network. Messages passed from bunker to bunker, from cave to cave, from one group of survivors to another. The word was simple: come to the Appalachian mines. There is hope. There is a chance. People began to move. They traveled through tunnels and abandoned subway systems. They crossed underground rivers and climbed through forgotten shafts. They came from all over the eastern part of the continent, following rumors of salvation in the deep earth. They noticed the movement. Their sensors detected unusual activity beneath the surface. They sent scout ships to investigate. They deployed ground troops to search the tunnel entrances. Ben organized defense teams to slow them down, small groups of fighters with whatever weapons they could find. They set traps in the tunnels. They collapsed passages behind them. They fought desperate battles in the darkness, buying time for the others to reach the gathering point. Many of them died. They knew they would die when they volunteered, but they did it anyway because they believed in what Kate had found. They believed that their sacrifice might save the rest of humanity. Jake led one of the last groups to arrive. He had gathered survivors from across 3 states, leading them through an underground journey that took nearly a month. When he finally reached the chamber of the Guardians, he stood in silence for a long time, staring up at the towering figures. "Are these things really going to help us?" he asked Kate. "I don't know," she admitted, "but they're the best hope we have." By the time the last group arrived, there were nearly 5,000 people packed into the underground complex. They filled the tunnels and chambers around the Guardian vault. They were tired, hungry, and scared, but they were also determined. Kate stood in the center of the Guardian chamber and addressed the crowd. Her voice echoed off the walls, reaching every corner of the vast space. "We don't know if this will work," she said. We don't know what will happen when we try to wake them, but we know that we cannot defeat the alone. We need help, and these guardians were built to give us that help." She paused and looked around at the faces watching her. Old and young, strong and weak, people who had lost everything but refused to give up. "All you have to do is think about one thing," Kate continued. "Think about hope, think about survival, think about the future we want to build. Focus all your thoughts on that one idea, and maybe, just maybe, they will hear us." The crowd fell silent. 5,000 people closed their eyes and focused their minds. They thought about the families they had lost. They thought about the homes that had been destroyed. They thought about the world they wanted to rebuild. In the Guardian chamber, the air began to hum. The crystals in the Guardian's body started to glow with a soft blue light. The seismic pulses that Kate had been tracking for months grew stronger and faster, like a heart beginning to beat. Danny watched his instruments with wide eyes. "It's working," he said. "The signal is reaching them. They're responding." The light grew brighter. The humming grew louder. The ground beneath their feet began to shake. And then, for the first time in 60,000 years, the first Guardian opened its eyes. The Guardian's eyes were like two blue stars burning in the darkness. They swept across the chamber, taking in the thousands of humans who stood before it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The massive figure simply looked at them, as if trying to understand what it was seeing. Then a voice filled the chamber. It did not come from any speaker or mouth. It came from everywhere at once, resonating directly inside the minds of every person present. "We hear you, children of Earth. We have heard your cry." Kate stepped forward on trembling legs. She was terrified, but she forced herself to speak. "Who are you? What are you?" The Guardian's head turned to look at her. Its eyes seemed to see through her, into her very soul. "I am called Sentinel Prime. I am the first of the Guardians. We were built long ago when your ancestors walked among the stars. They created us to protect this world and all who would live upon it." The other Guardians were waking up now. One by one, their eyes opened and their bodies began to move. 47 massive figures stretched and turned, shaking off the sleep of countless. The ground trembled under their weight. "Your ancestors were a great people," Sentinel Prime continued. "They traveled between worlds and built wonders that you cannot imagine, but they faced enemies. Terrible enemies who destroyed everything they had built. In the end, they chose to hide here on this young planet. They gave up their technology. They forgot their past. They became simple creatures again, starting over from the beginning." Jake pushed through the crowd to stand beside Kate. "Why? Why would they give up everything?" "To survive," Sentinel Prime replied. "Their enemies could not find them if they hid their power, so they buried it. They buried us. They left only a trigger, a way to wake us when the time came. When the children of Earth cried out for help, we would answer." The Kate said, "Can you stop them?" Sentinel Prime turned its gaze toward the ceiling, as if looking through miles of rock to the surface above. "We know they are predators. They consume worlds and move on. They believe they are unstoppable." The Guardian paused. When it spoke again, there was something cold in its voice, something dangerous. "They are wrong." The Guardians began to move. They walked toward the walls of the chamber, their massive feet shaking the ground with every step. They raised their arms and beams of light shot from their hands, cutting through solid rock like it was paper. They were making a path to the surface. The survivors watched in amazement as the Guardians carved their way upward. The tunnel they created was smooth and wide, rising at a steep angle toward the world above. The Guardians moved faster than any machine the humans had ever seen, eating through miles of stone in a matter of minutes. On the surface, they detected the disturbance immediately. Their sensors screamed warnings. Their commanders stared at their screens in confusion. Something was coming up from below, something big. The first Guardian erupted from the earth like a metal god being born. It burst through the ground near what had once been the city of Richmond. sending tons of rock and dirt flying into the air. It stood in the ruins of the human world, looking up at the alien ships that floated above. The fleet opened fire. Plasma beams that could melt mountains struck Sentinel Prime directly. The light was blinding. The heat was incredible. Any human structure would have been vaporized instantly. But when the light faded, the Guardian was still standing. Its shields glowed white-hot, absorbing the energy of the attack. It did not even seem damaged. Sentinel Prime raised one arm. A weapon built into its forearm began to glow. Then it fired. The projectile was invisible. It passed through the ship's hull as if it was not there. Then it exploded inside the vessel, tearing it apart from within. The ship broke into 1,000 pieces and fell from the sky like burning rain. The other Guardians emerged from the ground one by one. 47 warriors made of crystal and metal, each one carrying weapons that humanity could not understand. They spread out across the continent, engaging the forces wherever they found them. The aliens tried everything. They concentrated their fire, hopping to overwhelm the Guardians' shields. They launched ground troops, hopping to find weaknesses. They tried to flee, hopping to escape and regroup. Nothing worked. The Guardians hunted them without mercy. Their weapons cut through armor like knives through cloth. Their sensors tracked every enemy ship, no matter where it tried to hide. Their coordination was perfect, their tactics flawless. Jake found a working radio and managed to contact other survivor groups around the world. The news he received was the same everywhere. The Guardians had emerged from the Earth on every continent. They were engaging the fleet globally, and they were winning. In Europe, 3 Guardians destroyed an entire carrier group in less than an hour. In Asia, a dozen Guardians carved a path through the enemy's ground forces, freeing thousands of human prisoners from labor camps. In South America, Guardians intercepted a retreat and destroyed every ship before it could reach orbit. The aliens who had conquered 1,000 worlds were being slaughtered. Their proud fleet was being reduced to scrap metal. Their soldiers were being hunted like animals. For the first time since the invasion began, humans dared to hope. They emerged from their hiding places and watched the sky, cheering as ships burned and fell. They wept with joy and relief. They embraced strangers like family. Kate stood on a hillside near the tunnel entrance, watching Sentinel Prime fight in the distance. The Guardian moved with terrible grace, destroying enemies with every gesture. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "We did it," Danny Vance said beside her. "We actually woke them up." Kate nodded, but she did not smile. The Guardians were winning the battle, but she knew that winning a battle was not the same as winning a war, and she wondered what would happen when the fighting was over. What would the Guardians do then? What would they expect from the humans they had saved? And what kind of future would they build together? Those questions would have to wait. For now, the only thing that mattered was survival. And for the first time in 4 months, survival seemed possible. The war lasted 11 days after the Guardians rose. 11 days of fire and thunder, of burning ships and dying aliens. They fought hard at first, then desperately, then not at all. By the end, they were simply trying to escape. They did not succeed. Sentinel Prime led the pursuit personally. The Guardians chased the remaining ships beyond the Moon, beyond Mars, all the way to the edge of the solar system. They destroyed every vessel they found. They showed no mercy. They gave no quarter. When the last ship exploded in the darkness between planets, Sentinel Prime broadcast a message. It went out on every frequency, in every language the Guardians' ancient databases contained. The message was simple and clear. This world is protected. This species is defended. Any who come here with hostile intent will be destroyed. There will be no warnings. There will be no negotiations. There will only be death. Let this be known throughout the galaxy. Earth is no longer prey. The message repeated for days, echoing across the void of space. It reached other fleets in distant star systems. It reached the of species that had conquered. It reached civilizations that humanity did not know existed. And it changed everything. On Earth, the survivors began to emerge from their hiding places. They climbed out of tunnels and bunkers, out of caves and abandoned mines. They walked into the sunlight and looked around at the world they had inherited. It was a ruined world. The cities were gone. The forests were burned. The oceans were choked with ash. The beautiful blue planet that humanity had known was now gray and covered in the wounds of the invasion. But it was still their world, and they were still alive. Kate stood on a hilltop overlooking what had once been a great valley. Now it was a wasteland of craters and melted stone. The smoke from distant fires made the sky look orange. There was nothing beautiful about it. But she smiled anyway, because she was alive, because humanity had survived. Ben walked up to stand beside her. He looked older than he had 4 months ago. The war had aged him in ways that time alone could not. But there was a light in his eyes that had not been there before, a light that looked like hope. "What happens now?" he asked. Before Kate could answer, a shadow fell over them. They looked up and saw Sentinel Prime descending from the sky. The massive guardian landed softly nearby, its metal feet barely disturbing the ash-covered ground. "Now we rebuild," Sentinel Prime said. Its voice was gentler than before, no longer filled with the cold fury of battle. "The wounds of your world are deep, but they can be healed. We have the knowledge. We have the technology. It will take time, but Earth can be restored." Kate approached the Guardian, looking up at its towering form. "And what about you? What will you do now that the fighting is over?" Sentinel Prime was silent for a moment. When it spoke again, there was something almost sad in its voice. "We were created to protect humanity. That purpose does not end with a single battle, though we're not the only predators in the galaxy. There will be others, and when they come, we will be ready." The Guardian knelt down, lowering its massive head to look directly at Kate. Its blue eyes glowed softly in the dim light. "But protection is not enough," Sentinel Prime continued. "Your ancestors were travelers. They sailed between the stars and built wonders on 100 worlds. You are their children. You carry their potential within you. And when you are ready, we will help you claim your birthright." Jake had joined them now, along with Danny Vance and dozens of other survivors. They gathered around the Guardian, listening to its words with wonder in their eyes. "We will teach you," Sentinel Prime said. "We will show you how to build ships that can cross the void. We will give you the knowledge to harness the power of stars. We will help you become what you were always meant to be." "And what is that?" Jake asked. Sentinel Prime stood up to its full height. Its eyes swept across the gathered humans, taking in their ragged clothes, their tired faces, their unbroken spirits. "Survivors," the Guardian said, "builders, explorers, warriors, you are the children of Earth. You were beaten down and burned and driven into the darkness, but you refused to die. You kept fighting. You kept hopping. You found a way to call us when all seemed lost." The Guardian raised one massive arm toward the sky, toward the stars that were beginning to appear in the fading light. "The galaxy is vast and full of dangers, but it is also full of wonders. There are worlds out there that you cannot imagine, civilizations that have never met humanity, mysteries that have waited billions of years to be solved. And now, thanks to your courage and your determination, you will have the chance to see them all." Kate felt tears running down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of something else. Something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Joy. Real, genuine joy. The survivors began to cheer. They embraced each other. They laughed and cried and shouted at the sky. They had lost so much. So many people, so many places, so many memories, but they had also gained something precious. A future, a purpose, a destiny among the stars. As the night deepened and the stars grew bright above them, Kate looked around at the people gathered on that ruined hilltop. They were dirty and exhausted. They were wounded and grieving. They had been through hell and come out the other side. But they were human, and humans, she realized, were harder to kill than anyone had ever imagined. They had learned that lesson the hard way, and someday the rest of the galaxy would learn it too. Sentinel Prime stood watching over them like a metal god, a guardian from an age long forgotten. It had been built to protect humanity, but perhaps, Kate thought, humanity had protected itself. The Guardians had given them the power to fight back, but the courage to use that power, the will to survive against impossible odds, that had come from within. That was what made humans special. That was why they would not just survive but thrive. That was why, in the centuries to come, the children of Earth would spread across the stars and build an empire that would make their ancient ancestors proud. The burning was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the rest of the galaxy was about to learn what humans were truly capable of. They would learn to be afraid.